Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about the traffic pattern or the standard traffic pattern and how you should fly it to make those stabilized approach every time you're practicing landing. Especially it's very critical in the private pilot stage when you're learning how you first land and approach the field and do those consistent traffic patterns. So we're going to take off from Flagler runway 6. So our heading bug is going to be on 060, that's generally the runway heading. 55 knots, we're going to rotate, climb at 75 or 74 knots, that's our VY, until 500 feet, and then we're going to pitch down a little bit to 85 knots just for the cruise climb. Now the initial part where we climb at 74 knots is just to get off the ground as soon as possible with our best rate of climb. And now we're waiting for 500 knots to slightly lower a pitch for 85 knots. Now right now on the upwind, and then once we reach about 700 feet, that's the good point where we can start turning crosswind and continue our climb to 1,000 feet, which is the traffic pattern altitude in Flagler. As we turn towards the crosswind, we can use a couple different tools to help us make sure that we're actually on the crosswind. So in this instance, we're going to do a left traffic, that means left turns. So if the original heading, the runway heading was 060, that means the crosswind heading minus 90, that would be 330. Also, we're obviously looking outside because we're flying VFR and we're going to be adjacent to our pattern runway. And we can also use the heading bug on the right side of the HSI in this instance. Now, since we reached 1,000 feet, we're in a good distance from the runway, we can turn downwind, maintain 1,000 feet, slightly reduce the power of the cruise airspeed. Usually in the downwind in the Cessna, we're somewhere between 90 to 100 knots. And now we're basically just flying the downwind, and we're preparing to report the midfield. Now, this is a good point since the workload is not that high on the downwind, that we're already starting to build our situational awareness picture of planes behind us, in front of us, on the other side of the pattern, people that are coming straight in. Either if you have ADS-B in, listening to the comms, and building that picture so we don't cut off in the pattern anyone. And we're always staying safe in the pattern because most of the near misses and accidents happen in the pattern, happen in uncontrolled airport. So that's the most dangerous part of the flight, probably, especially in general aviation and VFR. So we're in the midfield. We can report our position to the tower in distance because we're inside class Delta. He's going to give us our landing clearance, touch and go clearance, option clearance, whatever that case may be, and our sequence number. So in this case, we're the only plane in the pattern, so we're going to be number 1, but it might be either number 2, 3, 4, depending on how many planes are in front of us in the pattern. Now, since we're abeam the number, we're going to reduce power to 1700 RPM. We're going to reduce flaps 10 below 110 knots and slightly lower the pitch to maintain 85 knots on the end of the downwind. Now we're waiting for the 45 degrees from the runway, from the numbers, and that usually comes with about 800 feet of altitude. So once we reach those two numbers, especially the 45 degrees, we can start turning base. Now, as we turn base, we can slightly increase our pitch to, once again, lower our airspeed to around 75 knots. And once we're below 85 knots, we can reduce flaps 20 as we prepare for the stabilized approach. Before we turn final, we're going to do what's called a judgment turn. Basically, our intention is to line up with the runway. So we're going to make that judgment turn toward the runway. We're going to pitch up a little bit more for 65 knots. Now, our power setting is constant at around 700 RPM, unless we feel like we're too high or too low, and then we have to correct our glide path toward that stabilized approach. But we're always aim for 65 knots on final, flaps 30. Now, we're a little bit high here, so that's why I'm going to reduce the power. I'm going to reduce the pitch a little bit. Once again, I'm still maintaining 65. I'm just changing the pitch and the power setting to allow for a higher descent rate towards the runway. Now, I keep on asking if I'm too high or if I'm back on the glide path. Now the second I'm going to get back on the glide path, I'm going to increase the power back to 1700 and increase the pitch a little bit to maintain that 65 knots. Now we generally point towards the beginning of the runway because we usually want to touch down about first, second, center line, depending on what you're aiming for. That's why we have to aim a little bit beforehand, so our flare is going to bring us to the touchdown. Now, once we cross the threshold, we're going to idle the power, level off at a good altitude at about 10 feet above the runway, and start increasing the pitch a little bit, sort of like a slow flight, to reduce the airspeed and let the plane sink toward the ground and then touch down. It doesn't have to be smoothly, but it has to be a safe touchdown. Now, if you can do that every single time, you can make very good landings, very consistent landings, and that's the basic traffic pattern.